go so fast, all tied up like a captive. I want you. Used to pay my mind like standing on rainbows, playing it cool. I haven't felt this in ages, and I know my patience. So won't you please stay a bit longer? You're making me stronger, making me stronger. Stay a bit longer. You're making me stronger, making me
Just to go on here. Alrighty. Apparently I had my camera on. Anyway, so welcome to my channel, Re-Vera. This is a fun one. This is all about how do we engage in politics and how do we make ourselves stronger. Yes. So hence the music, but let's kill that. Alrighty. So yeah, I've been. I wanted to apply the epistemology we've been talking about, which is theories of knowledge. How do we know what's true to politics? I said earlier that I really think we can build up to my current position foundationally, one brick at a time, and it's kind of hard to argue with when we do so. And it's important to be able to do that for a lot of reasons. So that's the plan to get into. Just wanted to kind of wait for a few people to get here and talk about how things have been going over here. So I mentioned in my last stream that my puppy dog Lucy was hit by a car. Super sad. She's okay. She's recovering in the other room. And she's a little drugged out right now because her toe was amputated. And they did this debridement where they clean out the wound and take off some of the tissue and stuff like this. Her what is it, left back paw? Yeah, left back paw was pretty badly mangled. Like it's not like she's not going to lose the leg, fortunately, but there was a lot of damage and she's in a lot of pain and there's a lot of drama. And the other puppy dogs are very upset. So very glad to see that she's starting to get back into it. But we're going to have to take her to the vet like every day for the next few days to change the bandages because she will have to be sedated to change them because the bandages like get all attached to the wound and stuff like this. So that's no fun. I know. I'm gonna see if I can show the video of us taking her home because all the other doggies were real happy to see her. So I didn't have that up in advance. Kind of got home late from work. Not late, but late for trying to stream today. Let's see. Oh, you see how you cannot see my chair? Good streamer chair. You also can't hear it. See, it's very quiet. It's very nice.
Oh my goodness.
I don't think I can show this video. Damn it. It's from Facebook. It's going to just... Can I full screen it? Yeah, I think it's just going to dox ourselves. Which I'm trying not to do. I've never cared about net privacy super much. But if I'm talking about controversial topics, it's probably prudent. This point has been made to me. So anyway, I'm not gonna be able to show that video. You gotta send it to me, babe. But oh well, it's a really cute video. All the dogs are super happy. I think I showed a picture last time. Does make everything more complicated when you try to do it without showing Facebook. Yeah, Marilyn was telling me this story. She before she got her toe amputated, she gave her a snack, and she seemed to put the snack between her toes of her front paws, like right between the toes, and then like looked up at her like, "See, I used my toes. Don't take my toe." But it needed to go. It was pretty banged up. Damn it! I thought I had it. Yeah. So who do we got here? Dorian, awesome. Thank you for coming. Marilyn, thank you for coming. Appreciate it. Should have prepared a little bit more and had some puppy pictures ready. Not that this is a pet stream. YouTube already thinks I'm a pet streamer because I have other videos from older that are pets. All right, so that was the topic. Why do we engage in politics? Something I wanted to think about because I've been hearing a lot of things from the BreadTube community that are kind of relevant to this. So Vosh, for instance, has been talking a lot about left purity testing, the woke scolders, the gatekeeping, all this kind of stuff, and how it's hurting the movement, and how some people seem to be engaging in politics just out of like, why? Like ego, it's like their tribe, but they don't seem to be actually trying to make the world a better place. So that's coming from him. I've heard some stuff from Destiny, seen some other stuff. Like it seems to be a topic people are discussing, and so that's where I was going to launch off from. But we're going to get into some epistemology as we go. But it's worth thinking. And when you ask this question, why, you got to keep in mind it's a deeper question than something you just answer by conscious, like, well, my intention is this. Like that's the conscious mind. Like in order to like psychologically analyze why we actually do something, you really have to analyze our behavior and whether our behavior is consistent with it, because we naturally rationalize our behavior without even thinking about it. So there might be other reasons beyond what we say, and we undoubtedly engage in politics out of entertainment, out of ego, out of tribalism. Stuff like that. So that's undoubtedly true. And that's fine. A lot of people come to politics for those reasons. It's entertaining. It's something people talk about. They, kind of want to be grown up. It's because, other adult friends, as they grow up, like they're adults they look up to, whether it's their parents or other people, we're into politics. So you want to have informed opinions on it. There's a lot of different reasons you get into it. And that's something worth considering. Because I think we would all agree, if we're thinking about it, that what we want to be doing... Let me show my screen over here. What we want to be doing is working to make the world a better place. So why do we engage in politics? If you have you thought about it? Why do you engage in politics? Like, what brings you to this kind of content? Do you campaign? Do you vote? What do you think brings it to it? Yep. Quite likely. But if we really want to make the world a better place, I think most of us would agree, if we're thinking rationally and consciously, that should be the goal. And it's not a bad thing to come for other reasons, but this is why we should stay. This is what we should work toward motivating our behavior with. We want to make the world a better place. So, yeah, that I should definitely put in there. And if you're looking for personal power, obviously I'm not really talking to you because you're at a different level. But power for your people group. Some people do it for that for sure, or for your demographics or for your representation or what have you. So having a voice in your government is part of making the world a better place. We're trying to make the world a better place through our personal power. That's why we engage with politics. And if we're this, I've been thinking about this last couple of days, but because hearing Vosh go on and on about these woke scolders and stuff like this, it was weird to me to hear about this gatekeeping that happens. I've heard about it before, but I realize I've always taken for granted the fact that we should be trying to convince people to our side. That's just been a given to me. It's just been part of my worldview that I've never considered. It's like, of course we want to win people to our side. Why on earth would anybody draw a line and say, no, you can't be in our movement? We live in a democratic society. We need votes to win anything. Ruling people out is wild. Think about it. If we're really trying to make the world a better place, and we live in a democratic society, somewhat, obviously it's more oligarchical than democratic. That's an issue we need to work to correct. But it's ostensibly democratic. We do have some influence. We need people on our side. Even people who are currently really bad people. Like, there are ex-Nazis who are cool people now. Like they've come over from the neo-Nazis. They've realized it was all messed up. They've learned. They've evolved. They've gone past it. Now they're full-on socialists, and they believe in equality for everybody. Like this kind of it happens, and we don't want to be like, well, you tweeted this horrible thing 5 years ago, and now you can't ever be in the left. Hell no. We need to have a broader coalition, and that doesn't mean we can't have safe spaces and inclusive and more restricted communities where you just want to hang out with like-minded people, and maybe restrict people from that. Like if you need to, if you feel a need to have a place you're comfortable to relax, there's nothing wrong with that. Obviously, there's a lot of people who aren't comfortable in broader spaces because they're discriminated against a lot, and that's fine. Like you can have your inclusive community. Just try not to alienate people from the left more broadly, and let's be less keen to hit the cancel button. There's can be legitimate reasons to cancel people, but canceling is something you do to people on your own side. Because I can't cancel Crowder or Ben Shapiro because they're have a different fan base. This is a point that was recently made. But it's always people from the same side that are doing the canceling, and that can typically only hurt the movement unless the person's actually, you can make the case that they're actually toxic to the movement. So that's all relevant to this. Why do we engage in politics? And ostensibly, we should try to make our behavior congruent with the value that we're trying to make the world a better place. So we need to try to win people to our side. But we also need to make sure we're on the right side. That's super important. If we're trying to make the world a better place and we're on the wrong side, then our work is making the world worse than it could be, at least. So logically speaking, there's the law of non-contradiction. So a significant portion of the world is clearly on a different side than us. And that's something that should give us pause. We got to think about that. So while we think we're on the right side, obviously now, we can't dismiss the effect of identity and tribalism. So when you think of yourself as a Republican or a Democrat, that's part of how your mind is shaping your identity. And it's you consider that part of who you are. And that's a really strong bias. Like, whether you realize it or not, there's an incredible bias just from considering something part of your identity. When you self-label something to yourself and you say, yeah, I'm a socialist, yeah, I'm a leftist, yeah, I'm a Democrat, yeah, I'm a Republican, I'm a conservative, yeah, I'm a Ben Shapiro fan, that's now part of your identity. You just labeled yourself as that. And that's really powerful. And it's not a bad thing, but we have to be very aware of it. And we should analyze it to make sure we're doing the right thing because of those biases. Because we know that not all the political parties are equal. So this is the thing, the law of non-contradiction. If we disagree, if we have a contradiction with another political party, one or both of us is wrong. That's the law of non-contradiction. Now, it does get a little bit more complicated than that because they might both be wrong. But even if they're both wrong, which they are, one can be more wrong than the other. And that's also true. There's a spectrum here. It's not just black and white. And there's a lot of different issues. And one side can be right on some of them and wrong on others. So, if we want to engage in politics seriously, we need to be able to justify our positions from the ground up so that we can try to win people over to our sides. And when you have this earned confidence that you're on the right side, I think that helps motivate more behavior from you and a more passion to be fighting for what's right. Because now you know it's right. It's not just like, yeah, kind of listen to that guy and he seems like he's cool and he's making some sense. Now it's like, oh, wow, like this is right. Like we can make a difference in the world if we are on this side, right? So there's a lot of different reasons it's beneficial to do this check where you're checking to see if you're on the right side. And there's a couple parts to that. That was in my little promotions I was copying and pasting. But there's... did I put them here? Anyway, there's a couple different ways, broadly speaking, that are essential to apply to this process. And one is trying to keep an attitude of open-mindedness, because we know we're biased, and it's difficult to get over that. Like I've been through the process personally, because I came from an extremely opposite worldview than I currently have, like entirely opposite on everything. And for years I debated on the other side and I thought I was right. And it wasn't until one day in the interest of strengthening my own position, I was like, I was like, these people that are arguing against me are so sure they're right. And I can tell they're so biased. Maybe if I saw things from their bias, maybe if I just like tried to be as objective as possible, maybe that would strengthen my arguments. So that's what I did. I went through this mental process of intentionally trying to be okay with being wrong. With like, okay, so what would happen if I was wrong and I like switched sides? Like I just switched labels. I went from being conservative to being liberal. Like what would happen? And I analyzed those fears and came to accept them. And I was saying it wouldn't be so bad. And it's like, well, I don't want to actually be wrong if I am wrong. So there's that. There'd probably be some alienation with my family, but, we got to do what's right. So I still think it's better. And I should say, just for full transparency, that my initial worldview shift happened on religious lines, not political lines. So my politics did lag behind this worldview shift for a while. That's definitely true, but that's kind of how it happened. Is I was trying to be more objective. I was trying to see it from the other side. I had faith that the truth would win out, and it did. I think. But if I'm still wrong, then I'm more than willing to change my position again. There's a couple areas where I'm still kind of evolving, for sure. So most of my positions, I'm pretty confident I can demonstrate empirically and methodologically, but I could be wrong on some parts of it. So I definitely want to talk about it, and I'm hoping, like I said, that we'll get more people over, because I would love to have some actual debates with some people who actually disagree. That would be very valuable. Okay, so we can't disregard the possibility we're on the wrong side. This is fallibilism. We mentioned that briefly before. And once you've accepted the fact that your own intuition, your own opinions, your own thought processes can be perverted and your judgment warped without your conscious knowledge, now the logical conclusion from that is I need to have something that's more reliable, that I need to put as a higher value than my own intuition. And this is the process of being rational, like actually rational. A lot of people think rationality is just, well, that's rational. And it's kind of like this common sense thing. It feels rational. And that's not rationality at all. Rationality, it can be demonstrated methodologically. It's not just your opinion that it sounds rational. That's not rationality. So we want to demonstrate it. So I would appreciate some input from you guys. I wanted to we when we get into political disagreements, you do have to start with values. So if you're watching this later on YouTube, if you didn't make the live show, please put in comments. This is like I had like 20 minutes at work to kind of put down what I've been thinking on, what's been bouncing around the bean. And these are some things that I put down, but I'm open to adding some more things. So I've said before, the main value is maximizing well-being from behind the veil of ignorance. So to cover what that means again, we're talking about human well-being within society, human society. And the veil of ignorance means that it's not just for you personally. It's not just for your group of people. Because then there's going to be people who are getting the short end of the stick. And in order to build a coalition that more people can be involved in, we want as many people on our side as possible. We want to solve global problems. That takes a lot of cooperation. We need to look at all of humanity as our tribe as much as possible. We need to build that broad. So the veil of ignorance says that I want to put forth policies that I would be okay with no matter who I was born to. Whether I was born to a poor black family or a rich white family or vice versa, or Jewish people or anything. You're born to people in Africa, you're born in war-torn Syria. Wherever you're born, you want policies that you would be okay with. If I'm born to a billionaire, my policies might not be super appreciated to me, but they wouldn't actually harm me. So there is a balance there. If there's a policy that significantly helps the 99% and it inconveniences the 1%, we're not talking guillotines here, then it's hard to make a counter argument against that if this is your base value, maximizing well-being from behind the veil of ignorance. But what does well-being mean? So that's my subpoints, because well-being is very broad and it can mean a whole lot of things. And I think most of us have a sense of what it means, but let's break it down. Let's think about it. What does it mean to you? So I've heard a lot of different thinking on it. Obviously, the term originally came, I don't know if it was original, probably wasn't original, but Sam Harris talks about well-being as a foundation for morality. But it can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. And to most people, freedom plays a big role in that. We want to be free to make our own choices. We want to be free to do what we want to do. So I think that's a foundational part of well-being. If you have everything you need, but you're in an extremely authoritarian society that you feel restricted by it, I think that would hamper your well-being. Freedom from others is a part of that too, because if we just have universal freedom everywhere, and anybody can just come up and oppress you and hurt you and torment you and bully you, then now I'm not free because you're bullying me. So that's where the saying comes from, your freedom to swing your arms ends where my nose begins. It's a good principle, good rule of thumb. So that's a core principle that goes under there. Equality of opportunity. I don't think anybody wants actual equality for everyone. This is a common conservative straw man that, liberals want everyone to be equal no matter what. But that's silly because some people are born stronger than others and some people are born smarter than others. So why should we all be equal? It's obviously there isn't and never will be true equality. And I don't know that that's even something we should value. But we should value equality of opportunity for a lot of different reasons. That means everybody has somewhat equal playing field to start from. And there's a lot of reasons society wants that, in addition to just the individuals who are currently being disadvantaged. But it benefits society because there's a lot of actual geniuses and actual innovators and people with different unique types of thinking that start out in very poor families. And if you don't have an opportunity, a good opportunity for them, then society is losing out on those people's potential. So there's a lot of different arguments you can make for why equality of opportunity is important. And that's the most important part of that is education. Because if poor people have a way crappier education and they don't have access to higher education, then they don't actually have equality of opportunity. So that's a really important thing. This country, and I was hoping to have some conservatives on here. So if you come on later, definitely comment. Like, my question here is a more meta problem. Like, we're not debating individual policies, though we can if somebody hops on or you want to comment. But the question is, are you on the right side? Should you be a conservative or should you be a leftist? Should you be Republican or should you be Democrat? And one of the things I would be thinking of is the fact that Republicans are incredibly anti-education. And education is one of the most, if not the most important things a country can invest in. It's how you invest in your future. The people you're currently paying to educate are going to be your voters, your producers, the core of your country in a, that later, obviously. It's the most direct investment in the future you can make is in education. And yet conservatives are constantly trying to cut education. Red states do horribly. I was hearing about the closest, I think it's the closest school to where my family lives in Idaho. And they've been so cut back on their funding and their budget that they have a lot of schools now where they have 2 different shifts because they can't afford more buildings. So you have one building where they have school from 6 a.m. until noon. And then there's like the shift and then a second shift where it's noon to 6, which is insane to me. Like, how much of an inconvenience is that for so many people? But they do that just to save a little bit of money. And how do you think they really have a good class size? Do you think they're paying their teachers well? I kind of doubt it. And then you look at the other ways conservatives attack education. Science. They want their pseudoscience taught as science in a lot of these places, and they are. There's a lot of places where tax dollars are literally going to fund the teaching of young Earth creationism. And evolution is not taught very well, and it's the core of biology. You can't understand life without understanding evolution. It's an incredibly important topic. And that's something I'd like to stream about because I've done a lot of debating with creationists and I've learned a lot about evolution. And I feel like I could do a good course that's an introduction for lay people, just making it very simple for people. So I will do that at some point. Equality under the law. So that's important. We don't want laws that treat people fundamentally in an unequal way. That's not just. That's not fair. Why should this law apply differently to some people than others? Like, this is, there's a lot of examples of laws that didn't used to be fair. So, like women's testimony was not regarded as highly in court. Like, you would need 2 women to outweigh the testimony of 1 man. That's not an equal law. And, there's been a lot of apartheid type of laws, and Israel currently has different laws for people from Palestine than, people from, like, Jewish people. So it's an apartheid state. And that's violating the veil of ignorance part of the initial value. So that's important. I put freedom from fear for basic survival essentials. Like, I think it's easy to argue well-being wise that if you're having to fear starving to death, that's not well-being. That's pretty simple. Healthcare, housing, food, water. Obviously we all die eventually, but we want to die later, much later, from natural causes, and we want to do everything we can to not have to fear sooner deaths just because we're missing something that is available in society. Like, that's wild. Why would you want people having to fear that? So if you know that your basics are going to be met, it actually frees up a lot of people to start their own business and do other things they love and create more in society because they don't have to fear the penalties of failing. If you fail at your own business, you can be homeless because you had to mortgage your house to get the business going, and now you have nothing. It's happened to a lot of people. So I think that's a pretty basic value that falls under the meta value there. But this, I did want to put this an opportunity for advancement. So I think that's one of the reasons, like, actual, like, perfect equality. It would not fit under the values I think are valuable, and you can correct me if you think I'm wrong. But I've imagined it because I've heard people on the left talk about how they want to abolish hierarchy, like all hierarchy, and I suspect most people are just speaking lazily. They're being hyperbolic. Most people, when they say that, they mean unjustified hierarchies, which cool. I agree, of course. We should abolish unjustified hierarchies. But if we all imagine a world where we all lived in really nice houses, and we all had pools, and we all had boats and yachts, and everything was equal. We all drove the exact same model of Mercedes, maybe. So it's like everything's good. We're all having a good life, but it's all the same for everybody. There's no opportunity for advancement. There would be a lot of miserable people there that would not be maximizing well-being. A lot of us, not all of us, a lot of us would just be happy with it. But a lot of people have a really deep inherent drive. They're competitive. They want to be better. They want to be striving toward a higher end, and they want. I think you need some elements of meritocracy in a society for people to be happy. No, obviously that's not the current system. Don't think I'm defending the current system because there's not very much actual meritocracy to our system. There's a lot of people who are, look at Trump with it. He's got a huge leg up from his rich dad and his hundreds of millions of dollars of loans that never got paid and all that kind of stuff. Like, he didn't become successful in business because he was so good at business. Anybody who believes that needs their head examined. But yeah, these are just some stuff I thought of off the top of my head. But what else does well-being mean to you? I want your comments. So if I'm missing something, or if you have another line that might expand on something we've talked about, what would maximizing well-being mean to you that's not in the list? Let me know. So that's all under that first meta value. The second one is truth matters. More accurate knowledge of reality leads to a higher probability of success in achieving goals in reality. In other words, more truth equals more of all of this. So if we want to maximize well-being, freedom, equality of opportunity, all this stuff, how we do that, or any goal, like literally any goal in reality, comes down to how accurate your knowledge of reality in that sphere is. That's why this epistemology and this honest search for truth matters so much, because that's what helps us be successful. That's how we achieve our goals. If otherwise we're shooting blind, we're guessing in the dark, and it's not a very good way to get stuff done. Like we're talking about politics here. There's a lot of psychology of influence that goes into how do we influence people. That's why there's one of the reasons conservatives, well, the only reason conservatives do as well as they do is because oligarchs are putting tremendous amounts of money into think tanks whose primary job is coming up with talking points that work well with our human psychology and convince people to think the way they want you to think. Like, there's a tremendous industry involved in propping up these talking points, and you quickly notice that how people in an echo chamber are all using the same points, especially establishment ones, which was the entire right is establishment, like regardless of what they want you to think. Like, I'm not, if you can correct me if I'm wrong, but almost all of them are like pro-establishment, status quo, pro-business, pro-oligarch, all of this stuff. They might want to go back a little bit in some areas, but it's very establishment generally. You get to the left side, and obviously, like, the establishment Democrats aren't necessarily doing a whole lot, but the progressives and the left are pushing pushing the window and trying to actually take power for the people, which, for anyone who didn't see my previous stream, this cannot be said too much, so maybe I'll just say it in every freaking video I ever do. anyone talking about politics who doesn't regularly talk about how virtually all of both parties has been gaslighting the voters and then selling out to oligarchs for decades is also gaslighting you, intentionally or not. This is just true. This has been demonstrated empirically in studies. Moneyed interests have phenomenally more influence in what actually gets done by government than voters do. That's really sad, and that's really bad, and I doubt that most people would defend that. And yet one political arena, progressives, is making this argument and fighting on it hard. Nobody else is. Establishment Democrats certainly aren't. Nobody on the right that I'm aware of is. I've had people tell me libertarians do, and then I looked up their platform, and they explicitly are in favor of unlimited private funds in elections. So no, they're not. There's nobody on the right that is talking about this issue. Like, look up these studies. You can just type in "U.S. is an oligarchy," and these studies come up. These have been done. You can look over the methodology. It's done by Princeton, I believe. And it shows that the top 10%, the wealthy, have far more influence than everybody else. And then business groups, and then interest groups. But actual citizens have very little influence in what gets done. And we can't solve anything that goes against the interests of the very wealthy without solving the problem of their influence they have in government. So that makes that the most fundamental, foundational issue in politics. And that's something we have to work on in order to do any of this stuff. Because these things, a lot of these things, violate the will of oligarchs, of billionaires. Think about it. Do they care about your personal freedom? Like, they care about your freedom to buy their product, but they don't care about your right as a worker to have a say in your working situation. I mean, given their whim, they'll have you as a slave. Most oligarchs have factories in the third world that are absolutely atrocious, where people like literally die from heat exhaustion and all kinds of crazy stuff. Like, they are not committed to freedom for you as an individual. It's ridiculous. And they're not committed to freedom from others, because this freedom here is fundamentally about protecting you from oligarchs, because they will oppress you as much as they can, because they think that's their given right as oligarchs. As you know, I'm a billionaire, of course I should get my way. I'm a business owner, I'm a job creator, I should be able to do whatever I want. You know, this is their thinking. They're not for any of this stuff. So if you're a Republican, I don't know how you get around this. This study is what put me to the left. I was a conservative when I first came across this, and when I realized it, when I saw that headline, it was a wake-up call. It blew my mind, because I love this country. I love the Constitution. I love the idea of freedom. I love the idea of democracy. I love the idea of a government of, by, and for the people. I gobbled up all this history that said the founding fathers were these awesome people who created a brand new form of government that had never existed, the American experiment, and we changed the world, and because we made a government of, by, and for the people. And then I see a headline that says the U.S. is an oligarchy, not a democracy. What? Princeton, yeah. And what blew my mind the most wasn't just this fact, it was the fact that I'd never heard it before. This does not exist within that echo chamber, the conservative echo chamber. I mean, if I'm wrong, correct me. Tell me who's talking about it. I haven't seen it. It's definitely not focused on by any politicians. They don't have any policies that would change this. They're not... We can't solve climate change. We can't solve exploitation. We can't solve anything that contradicts these people's interests without getting the influence of money out of politics. And that, I think, to me, is the most fundamental reason why it's correct to be on the progressive side of things, because this is a foundational issue for all true progressives, like AOC, Bernie Sanders. These people are funded, and Justice Democrats generally, that's a good one. Wolfpack, which is a really good organization. It's done by Cenk Unger of the Young Turks. They're progressives. Like, these people are all heavily invested in the idea of getting money out of politics. And I don't know who else is. That alone is enough to make me strongly consider switching sides if I'm not already. This evidence right here. That's a good little rant. Okay, so this is the initial value, is that we understand more truth equals more success in our goals. And we know that cognitive biases pervert our intuition and judgment. So we talked about that earlier. Because of the effects of identity and tribalism, it blinds us, and we know those biases affect our judgment. This is demonstrated in a ton of studies. We can look this stuff up if you want to. But they do all kinds of scientific studies. They do control groups, and they do a lot of different ways of testing. And it's very clear. And I don't think we even need to look into it, because most people know this. When you see somebody you disagree with and you're trying to have a discussion and they're not understanding you, we all attribute it to bias, because we know bias is a thing. It's easy to see it in other people. It's not so easy to see it in ourselves. But we should be able to rationally conclude that, yeah, I'm a human. I probably have bias. And because we know that, and because we know that more truth leads to more success, like, this leads to the unavoidable conclusion that in order to maximize truth value, we must maintain an openness to being wrong. That's half the equation to an honest search for truth. And then the other half is relying on reliable epistemic methodologies more so than we trust our own feelings, intuition, judgment. So if we get to the place where mentally we put a higher priority on truth, we're like, yes, truth matters. I can understand that. I believe in truth. And because I believe in truth, if I'm wrong, I really want to know. Like, I want to know so I can correct my position. That way you're more right. You'll get more right as you get older, which helps you smash in debates. It helps you achieve more success in life. There's a lot of reasons we want to be more right. We want to search more truth. So those two things. And there's clearly, demonstrably, much more reliable methodologies for finding truth than our own intuition, our own feelings, our own judgment. I mean, this is very easy to demonstrate. Common sense is, like, as soon as somebody talks about common sense, the first thing you always hear is common sense isn't so common anymore. Well, that's because common sense is based off intuition, which is based off of your history, your environment, the things that have happened to you, your education, and it's different for everybody. So your little tiny version of common sense over here is different than everybody else's. And because there's so much inherent contradiction in the world, there's so much controversy over some pretty clear issues, we know that's not a reliable methodology, because that's how people are getting there. They're getting there through intuition, through environment, through hearing people. And we know that's not reliable because of the contradiction in the system, because the fact that there's half the country on one side and half on the other for almost everything, it seems like. We're a very divided country. So we can't trust that. And I'm not saying intuition's worthless. Intuition's very valuable, because there's a lot of things you might have learned, and you might have tested your intuition, and you might have, like in sports, if you train a lot, your intuition is going to be what you rely on. If you get in your head and you start consciously thinking about what you're doing, it slows you down. So you got to rely on intuition because it's faster. But in terms of epistemology, intuition is never reliable. So we don't want to trust it. We want to use a methodology, which means we can break it down, we can show it, we have a method to our madness, and we can demonstrate point for point how we're getting to our position. So science, logic, math are examples of the most obviously reliable methodologies. And if you disagree with that, then That's a whole other conversation, but I think most people see the reliability of those. But they all involve showing your work. With logic, you have premises leading to a conclusion. With science, you start with a hypothesis, you test it, you submit it for peer review so that other people can test it, etc. And consistent standards of evidence. So, like, regardless of what field you're talking about, if I'm trying to convince somebody of my position, I'm going to present evidence, and they're going to present evidence. But you have to be able to think what is the standard of evidence you're appealing to here. So there's a lot of specific examples you can get into, like we were talking about the impeachment proceedings, for instance, and like you need to apply standards of evidence consistently. So it is a legitimate criticism if somebody else did the exact same thing and nobody pressed charges on them. That's why there's precedence in legal cases and stuff like that. If I'm willing to accept as evidence an anecdote like somebody's story, then that can't be reliable because there's anecdotes on every side of every issue. So you're going to immediately be in a state of contradiction, because if you apply that standard of evidence consistently of believing people's testimonies, now you're in a state of contradiction because you're believing everybody. So that doesn't work out so well. All right. So that's my initial rant. That was all about why do we engage in politics and how do we know if we're on the right side. So I'd like to get more into this, but to get more into it, I would need to test it against somebody. We need somebody to comment who disagrees, and then we can talk about it. I need to find some people who are willing to debate this in Discord, and we can get them streaming live. So I'll work on that. If you're willing to talk, let me know. If you know anybody who might be willing to talk, let me know. Let them know. Let's try to make this happen. It's a good framework, I think, to work off of. So we can talk about the framework, or we can just try to apply it. Let us know. And I feel like there's a lot of things to talk about that I could talk about. What do I want to say? What do I want to get into? Okay, I'll do it. Fuck it. So I've seen this a couple places on my social media. And this is Scott Adams, the creator of the Dilbert cartoon. And he's got a message for children about climate change. This came out after Greta. So we can apply a little bit of epistemology to this and try to analyze the arguments that are being made. Because I have seen this in several places. It seems to be pretty... it's of contemporary value. So, let's see. Dear children, I'm sorry adults have frightened you about climate change and how it might affect your future. Well, you might be less afraid if you knew some facts that adults intentionally do not explain to you. I'll tell you here. Okay, so if there was actually a false narrative going on, which there's to some degree sometimes, you can make that argument. There's alarmists. There's been people who are hyperbolic about science. Science itself has been extremely accurate when it comes to predictions, but there's people who have misinterpreted that and said things like 10 years from now humanity will be extinct, and that's an exaggeration. But if you actually look at the science, it is quite concerning if you're giving it a sufficient time scale. So let's look at his facts. The news was once a source of real information, or so we thought. But in the modern world, the news people discovered they can make more money by presenting scary news, regardless of whether it is true or not. Today, much of the news on the right and the left is opinion that is meant to scare you, not inform you, because scary things get more attention. And that makes the news business more profitable. Same is true for people who write books. Authors often make books scary so you will buy them. Most adults know all the scariness is not real. Most kids do not. You just learned it. Okay, so let's analyze that for a second. Of course, this is largely true, but this is a critique of capitalism. I'm sorry, is Scott Adam a socialist? Does he want to have publicly owned news platforms that aren't swayed by ads? Because that's the systemic critique we make here. Like, if this is what you're starting from, the conclusion is we should fix this. Because yes, clickbait headlines are a problem. Emotionally driven everything is just driving a wedge between the countries, splitting us up. It's not persuasive to anybody. People who agree with it click it, and people who don't, and it's just creating these echo chambers. And it's because of the fact that whoever gets the most clicks is getting paid more, because you're paid per click by advertisers. So this is a systemic critique of the capitalist news system. And I'm not going to disagree with that. Of course that's true. But that doesn't, one of the things you might argue is that the fake news media is something scary that they're trying to sell you on. He's engaged in it himself here. Like, everything you see isn't real. Like, this is the argument, and he's basically trying to scare people. Not all the news business is equally uncredible. Like, there's obviously legitimate journalists and legitimate sources, and if you use some good fact-checking methodology, it's not difficult to tell the difference. If you're seeing sources report stuff that you later find out is false and they don't retract it, don't trust that source. Like, that's not a trustworthy source. They have to retract stuff that's wrong. They shouldn't be hyperbolic before all the evidence is in. Like, there's some standards of journalism that need to come into play here. Okay, nuclear energy used to be dangerous back in the olden days. Today's nuclear power plants, the ones built in the past 20 years all over the world, have killed 0 people and are considered the safest form of energy in the world. More people have died installing solar panels and falling off roofs than have died from nuclear power problems anywhere in the world for the past few decades. Nuclear energy is the obvious way to address climate change, blah, blah, blah. He says this is most of the smartest adults in the world. You notice there's no sources, of course. It's a lot of adults sharing this. It's not kids. He's writing it like it's to kids, but adults like simple things too. But there's no sources. We can pull this up. So, yes, I am in favor generally of nuclear energy, as are most people. I'm not scared of nuclear energy. This is, like, most of the fears of nuclear energy are not legitimate. People are scared of radiation. They're scared of the nuclear waste. And there's a lot of, if you actually look at the statistics, you can't make an argument that nuclear energy is more dangerous than coal or oil for certain. And you might even be able to make an argument that, it's better than solar in some ways. But that doesn't make it necessarily the answer. There's a lot of people pushing this narrative that nuclear is the answer. And there's a lot of money behind that idea. There's a lot of energy corporations that would like that to be the answer. It's a lot of people that have a vested interest in it. And, I think this is the article I read before. So these are some very level-headed reasons why nuclear energy might not be the answer. And it's not because, I'm so scared of radiation. So, let's see. Are they itemized? Anyway. Small group of scientists, which is true. It's not like Scott over here is trying to pretend like most smart people agree nuclear energy is the answer. That's not true. A small group of scientists have put that forth. It is far from a mainstream opinion that that's how we solve climate change. So this is something I've looked up and debated people with. Nuclear power plants take a long time to put into place. They take on average 14 and a half years to build from the planning phase all the way to the operation. I've looked up a lot of nuclear power plants in their time, and that's the average. Like there's a few that are faster, but I don't like very few that go from planning to in operation in less than like 7 years. So it takes a long time to phase that in. That's not a quick solution, and we need radical change quickly. So that's that's a variable to keep in mind. Now, it doesn't mean we shouldn't build more nuclear plants, because we can phase those in as time goes on and help our system, for sure. Absolutely. Who would argue against that? And there's some validity to this argument, but it's also true that you can't just immediately switch to completely, wind and solar and stuff like this immediately either. So there's going to be people dying from air pollution either way. But it does take longer to build nuclear plants, so that's a point. But they are faster. It's faster to phase in sustainable stuff. Long-term lag between planning and operation. So that's what we've been talking about. So they have a few examples. You can look it up. There's not that many nuclear plants in the world, so it's not actually that difficult to look through them. There's a lot of specific examples. But this is the main difference is cost, because something has to be economically viable as a replacement. We can't just double our energy costs. That would be incredibly damaging to all of us and our standards of living, and we would all be backsliding substantially, and that would be hurting our well-being. And if that's what we needed to do for humanity to survive, I think we would still have to do it. But I don't think we're there yet. We can solve climate change without significantly harming the well-being of society. And there's a lot of different ways we can demonstrate to do that. But in order to do it, we need to find economically viable solutions. And if you look at the cost per megawatt hour for a new nuclear plant is 151 to 189 per megawatt hour, which compares to $43 for onshore wind and $41 for solar. So as you can see, it's a lot, actually costs less. It's much more economically viable. And that's probably an underestimate. So 2 to 3 to 7.4 times more than a wind or solar farm. And that cost estimate doesn't include nuclear meltdowns, which can happen even with, probably will happen with moderns. Here's the thing, like you have to keep in mind, yes, we can build a solar plant that's very safe now, but everything decays over time. And this is the problem with the older ones. It's not that they weren't built well, but things decay over time. The concrete gets less strong. Things start to crack. And you need a lot of different safety mechanisms. And some of the, it's very difficult to impossible to, turn a nuclear power plant off. Like, you can't just turn it off and do maintenance, because that reaction is going. And it's very difficult to do maintenance. Or to refurbish it. That's the whole problem. So yes, we can create one now that's good and it'll last a while, but they don't last forever and they're very expensive. And they do have the risk of at some point melting down for one reason or another. There might be a natural event like a horrible earthquake or hurricane or something that contributes. That cost has to be considered. The cost of storing nuclear waste. Yeah, all that stuff. There's a weapons proliferation risk to nuclear. So if we are pushing this nuclear answer, well, it's going to go to everybody. We need an energy solution for the planet, and we can't just be for the Western world, because then the rest of the world is still polluting and they're still causing climate change. So if we have nuclear energy in all across the world with that technology, that will lead to more proliferation. It kind of has to. Meltdown risks. I was included in the cost, but there's separate risks to it. Uranium mining is very damaging in a lot of ways. Lung cancer, but also to the environment and other stuff like that. There are other emissions from nuclear power plants. not necessarily a high carbon emission, but there are other types of emissions that cause greenhouse gases and some waste risk. So there's legitimate and clear-headed reasons why nuclear is not necessarily the answer. And I don't think we should be spreading fear about nuclear, but I am going to push back of you telling me the solution for climate change is nuclear, full stop. That's not informed by science or clear thinking. Yeah, of course, a lot of people are in favor of nuclear energy. So Scott Adams is going on to talk about how Democrats and Republicans, many of them, are agreeing on this. Yeah, nuclear energy is part of the solution. For a grid to be reliable, you need constant output. At least part of the grid has to be constant output. Whereas solar and wind obviously is not constant output. It varies depending on the weather and, whether it's night or day and stuff like that. So that's a valuable source of it. There's other sources. You can do water power with dams. You can do tidal power with the tides. There's different ways of doing stuff. You can do bioenergy. That's basically, like algae farms that are then used as fuel. So it's a carbon neutral cycle. Stuff like this. So there are other options than nuclear, but nuclear is a valid part of that as a certain percentage of the grid. But you can't just do nuclear, and you can't just do nuclear by itself without the government contributing. Like, Republicans are not willing to incentivize any of this stuff. In order to solve climate change, there needs to be government action. We need to accept the problem. If you're worried about nuclear waste, you probably should not be. I agree. There are concerns with it, but we can adequately deal with it. If we put all the nuclear waste in the world in one place, it would fit on one football field. It's a solvable problem. There are legitimate issues, but they're not nearly as big issues as every other form of power has. If you look at the runoff from coal plants and coal mining that just decimate whole ecosystems, you can't even hold a candle to it with nuclear energy. Okay, so this is where we get into another argument. The United Nations estimates that the economic impact of climate change will reduce the economy by 10% in 80 years. What they don't tell you is that the economy will be about 5 times bigger and better by then, so you won't even notice the 10% that didn't happen. Yeah, I don't believe that at all. He, again, doesn't have a citation, so it's hard to criticize what he's talking about, because the United Nations is a huge organization, obviously, and they have a lot of different parts to it. And are you talking about the parts of it that specifically address climate, or is this like a more business-friendly aspect of it? Like, how old is this prediction? What is this based on? Is this assuming that we've changed our how we do energy in the world? Like, is this assuming that we've kept the temperature from raising a certain amount? Because I guarantee you, if we have 4 degrees Celsius higher by the end of the century, which is entirely possible, there's going to be a hell of a lot more than just a 10% economic factor. The kind of things that go along with 4 degrees Celsius is whole regions of the earth are uninhabitable. You think about the dollar value in real estate of all this real estate people own that's no longer inhabitable, either because oceans are rising or because heat's going up, and some places are already so hot it's hard to live. That's unfathomable. Real estate is so valuable. It's so expensive. Like, you think, the cost value of Miami alone, which is like entirely like matter of feet above sea level. If all those skyscrapers, all those expensive homes, and they're all underwater and we can't rebuild because the ocean's gone up a meter or 2 meters, the economic impact of that's probably 10% by itself, let alone the rest of the shorelines. This is insanity. This is why we need a citation. What are they looking at? They might just be looking at the economic impact of a single part of climate change instead of the whole picture. So Never trust people who don't give you a citation. It's not a fact if you can't fact check it. A number of companies have recently built machines that can suck CO2 right out of the air. I'm not a big fan of Thunderfoot. He's kind of a reactionary at this point. And there's a lot of stuff he does that's not so great. But he's very good on science and physics and doing debunking videos on technology. And he's done a couple of these on some of this sucking the CO2 out of the air technology. And if you analyze the energy cost to do so, it is astronomical. It will never be economically viable to create machines to suck CO2 out of the air. That's ridiculous. And the fact that he would even suggest that, like, that's the kind of thing, when you see somebody suggest something that's so ridiculous, they should lose all credibility to you. You should be like, why should I finish reading this argument? Why should I finish reading this article? Why should I ever read anything else by this person? He has no freaking clue what he's talking about. And the reason is machines aren't going to suck it out. Plants can. So the plants are an extremely advanced technology at sucking CO2 out of the air. So if we want to reverse it, we're not putting money toward machines that do it is insanity. No. Clearly the most rational way to do this is something like an algae farm that sucks a lot of CO2 out of the air, and it creates a product, algae, which you can then put back in the ground instead of burning, and that's going to be a carbon neutral cycle. So for instance, if you had I read that I don't know if I could pull it up real quick, but I read that we could replace all of our fossil fuel consumption in the United States with an area the size of Maine committed to algae farms. Well, what if we had twice as much area of desert and mostly unused areas, and half of it went as a soil additive, like you sold it to farmers and they spread it on their fields. It went back into the ground. So now it's a carbon neutral cycle because we're burning half of it, and we're going to need some oil and lubrication, and we need some fuel for some things. Even when we get to most things being running on electricity, we need some fuel. So if that's all biofuel, and then the other half of it is going into the ground, now we have a carbon negative cycle. But no, nobody should be investing in technology that sucks CO2 out of the air, because that is insane. We will never be more efficient than the molecular, on a cellular basis, at a molecular level. They are doing this so much more efficiently than we could ever hope to. It's insane to me that people would waste money trying to do this. It is insane to me. I have to believe that everybody that's actually in these industries that's doing this know it's a money sink. They're just trying to milk investors and governments and shit. Like, they have to know that's a dumb way to do this. Plants have this technology much better than we will. So let's just use the plants. Like, we can maximize how plants grow and then put the carbon into the ground, and that's going to be more effective than trying to do it at a synthetic level. Insane to me. So he's saying that you can suck the CO2 out of the air. As they come down in cost and improve in efficiency, they're never going to be as efficient as freaking algae. Not going to happen. So we have a solution already in hand. Yes, we do. It's just not machines. It would be expensive, yes. Any infrastructure change is expensive, which is why we need the political will to get behind this, which is why he shouldn't be arguing against the political will to change things. We need political will to put tremendous infrastructure spending to change this and to build things like algae farms and other biofuels, etc. And solar renewable, etc., etc. Yeah. There's no real risk of CO2 ruining the world now that we know how to remove any excess from the atmosphere. Except there is, because we're not funding any of this. It takes a while to put into place. We're on a cruise ship here, a very large one, that has been called unsinkable by conservatives, one might say, and it is heading for an iceberg. And we have a very small time window to start steering because it's a big freaking ship. This is the whole planet. This is our entire systems of everything. It takes a while to steer that ship. So the fact that, oh, there's no real risk here because we know how to fix it, in theory. No, we need the political will to actually start steering the ship the way we need to steer it. That's a big freaking change. This is one of the biggest industries in the world is fossil fuels, is gas and oil. So we need to eliminate those companies so that they don't exist anymore, because we need to stop pulling fossil fuels out of the ground. We need to start putting carbon into the ground. That's how you reverse climate change. Instead of pulling carbon out, you're putting carbon in. And then the old conservative argument, plants need CO2 to thrive. We don't want to remove too much. That's not the concern now, and it will never be our concern. Yes, greenhouses pump in CO2. So what we should let the oceans rise and temperatures rise to where we could trigger a cascading effect that could lead us to being like freaking Venus and extincting life on this planet, just so that plants grow better for a little while. That's dumb. This is literally a conservative argument. And he's not explicitly making that argument here, but it's clearly kind of like a dog whistle to that argument, because this is something conservatives say. Well, plants need CO2. Yeah, they don't need like a percent or two, like the little bit of the amount different in the atmosphere does not make a significant impact to plants. It makes a significant impact to our climate, however, which negatively affects plants if they're in a place where the temperature raises tremendously and where fires start going out of control. Duh. Scientists tell us we could reduce climate risk by planting more trees, a lot more. That's all doable, should the world decide it is necessary. It is necessary. We need to help people understand that it's necessary, and we need to start motivating that political action, which he is doing the opposite of. There's other ways to address climate change. Yes, I agree. I'm an optimist. This is something that's doable, but he's trying to argue against Greta Thunberg and her arguments that are alarmist because they're based on reality. Because if we don't change things by doing the things he's saying, like, yes, we can do this stuff, but if we don't, the future is very grim indeed, and nothing's happening right now. Like, the fact that we've known all this stuff for decades and we still don't see any significant action is very freaking concerning and justifies everything Greta said. Just because you can theoretically solve a problem is a long way from actually solving it. Throughout all modern history, when we humans see a problem coming from far away, we have a 100% success rate in solving it. Really? Marx saw the problems inherent to capitalism, 150 years ago? Not much success solving that one. People still oppressed all over the place. People still don't have say in their workplaces. They're not entitled to a fair share of the profit they're producing. What are you talking about? How can you possibly make such a broad argument without backing it up at all? This is bad. CO2 scrubbers. See, I'm pretty sure Scott Adams is a libertarian type, which means pro-oligarch, pro-business. And when you can motivate people to spend money on research, that helps. Like, does he own stock in some company that's working on CO2 scrubbers? This is insanity. If you're worried about rising sea levels, don't be. The smartest and richest people in the world are still buying property on the beach. They don't see the problem. They do. There's actually a lot of research on this. Just because some people are buying some beachfront property doesn't mean they don't see the problem. yeah, the ocean isn't going to go up like 20 feet. It's going to go up a meter or two. But then there's a storm surge that's can be even more devastating. So if you're buying vacation houses and you build it with a concrete wall because you have money, you're a billionaire, then there's no threat there. Well, why not buy the nice beachfront property? We all like beaches. We all want to have a beachfront house. So of course there's going to be a value there. And it's going to be a long time until that's no longer valuable. So if you have the money to buy a beachfront house, it's going to be good for you for another 50 years, unless you're unlucky with a hurricane. And if it's built well, you can still be lucky. Like that this is a bad argument. Beachfront property has always been like the most valuable property where we want to live near water. It takes a while to steer that ship too. And just because a lot of people are making dumb individual choices based on the fact that there's been a lot of climate denial, so they really believe that climate's not going to be a threat, doesn't mean that those people are right. Because that there's a whole echo chamber devoted to don't worry about climate change. So some people, who cares? Buy property on the beach. There's a lot of reasons this is a bad argument. How do you know these are the smartest people? Like this is just this kind of language is really dumb, really dumb. Smart people that have a high IQ aren't automatically right about everything. This is why epistemology matters and methodology matters, and this is why I talk about these kind of things. Because how you come to your conclusions is important regardless of how intelligent you are. Really super intelligent people, I know several very intelligent people that are wrong on just about everything and they put their rationality and their intelligence towards justifying irrational positions that you can clearly demonstrate are irrational, and you can clearly demonstrate how they're trying to justify it's wrong, but they tie up these mental resources trying to engage in this dance, and they don't get to where they're what's actually demonstrably correct by reliable methodologies. The smartest people in the world. Like, this is well known in every academic arena. Like, just because you're very smart and you're a physicist doesn't mean you're necessarily right when you're speaking about philosophy. Like, stay in your lane, buddy. You're not educated on what you're talking about. And this is true. Like, there's so much human knowledge right now. Last I saw, which was years ago, human knowledge has been growing on this crazy curve to where we are doubling all of humanity's knowledge every 3 years, which is wild. It's gotten to the point that no one person can possibly know like 1/100% of humans' knowledge. Like, if you're in the field of biology, you can't know everything about biology. That's just one field. You can't possibly know like 1% of biology. That's why there's so much specialties when you get into academic vocations. There's so many specialties because we have to specialize to be able to take it all in and adequately deal in something. So to think that just because smart people do something they're right is insane. They don't know what they're talking about. They're not climatologists. Now, if you can point to a study you did that showed, I studied 1,000 climatologists and 90% of them own beachfront property. That might be something worth looking into, right? But that's not the case. I highly doubt any climatologists are doing much investment on the beach. They know what's coming. Adults sometimes like to use children to carry their messages. Like, people like Greta are being used. Like, she's much more concerned about this than her parents. She's actually brought her parents around to her side, but when she started, they were not supportive of her at all. Like, the idea that she's being pressured by adults is not true. Like, she's looked at the science, the scientific consensus. Like, you don't have to be a scientist. You just have to be like, oh, so like 99% of scientists agree. Okay, yeah, I guess it's real. Shit, we got to pay attention to this and do something about it. So, no, she's not being used. most adults, I think, would be like, yeah, nuclear energy is fine. You're now smarter than most adults on the topic of climate by reading his idiot opinion for like 2 seconds. It's really dumb. You will be the most educated and effective humans of all time. Well, our standard of living is decreasing. Our expected lifespan is decreasing. Our education's getting worse. So even though we have access to more knowledge, I don't necessarily know that this is true. I hope it will be. I mean, there's a lot to be said for the availability of knowledge, the internet, stuff like this, but that doesn't mean it's going to be true. Who's denying you the basic facts? Yeah, no source. Anyway, I really went on a rant on that, but I promised somebody I would, so I wanted to talk about it. Alrighty. Do I have anybody left, or am I been ranting too long? Let me know what's going on. What are your thoughts? What else should we talk about? Yeah, I was listening to a Ben Shapiro video. I was taking notes on it. That's what, scrolling across the screen, I put some timestamps, but I don't think it's really worth discussing to any more longer degree. But what I did think was interesting, I have timestamps here, was, I know, I've always known Ben Shapiro's not, he's a kind of an anti-Trump Republican. No Republicans are like none of the Republicans, very few of them are like, that are like on the record, that are like pundits, either politicians, are like, yeah, I'm going to vote Trump out. Like, I will vote for a Democrat over Trump. Like, there's a limit to anti-Trump Republicans. But he's very clear, and he's like condescending about Trump, and he's very clear about how bad he is. Trump sucks a lot. So some points, yeah, he said Rudy Giuliani is the world's worst lawyer, and Trump has a tendency to hire the incredibly worst lawyers, which is clearly true. One of his lawyers is in jail right now. Well, that reflects on Trump. You're saying Trump's incompetent and he's not good at getting the best people, which was the argument from everybody, is that he doesn't need to be a politician. He doesn't need to know how things work because he's going to bring in the best people. He didn't. Like, the fact that they turn over so quickly is proof of that. So that's a reflection on him. And there's a lot of talking of his general incompetence, his bad scheming. He shouldn't be pressuring China. There's other points. But if you accept the fact that Trump is like A, a horrible person, and B, like an incompetent person, like somebody who just should not be president, which this is perfectly clear to any intelligent person. I'm sure Ben Shapiro is intelligent. He can't deny this. He's putting it out there. But if you're a Republican of any flavor, maybe you should analyze how other Republicans are making choices, if they're making such a bad choice as Trump. Yeah, I mean, we're trying to think, should you be a Republican? And if they pick Trump out of 17 candidates, that might be indicative of some heavily unreliable epistemology in the thinking of the party. And it's not just that they voted for him. It's that they continue to rabidly support him no matter what. Like, you have to look at that and be like, there must be something else going on here. These people are not being rational. They're not valuing truth. They're just supporting him no matter what. And if that's how they think, that flawed epistemology, that tribalism that they're applying here can apply to everything else. And if I'm within this echo chamber and there's all this flawed thinking going around, it's going to affect me eventually. Maybe I should get out and go to somewhere that values truth more. Just saying. That's kind of a red flag to me. And it's not just that. There's a bunch of things. And another one was climate change. I mean, if you accept the reality of climate change, which is the easiest thing in the world to demonstrate, you have to accept the reality that the right wing has been wrong on this for decades, and loudly wrong. They have been mocking the left on this for a long time. All their major pundits, politicians have been wildly wrong on this issue. Now, there's some of them that are actually starting to come around, starting to admit it. And, they usually say something. People say things like, well, the climate's always been changing. That's a form of denial. It's changing at a dramatically faster rate than it's ever changed before. Excepting like meteors hitting Earth. Like literal extinction events. But then natural causes, no. Another thing they say is climate, like we're affecting the climate, but we don't know how much, and we don't know if we can actually change it. Like maybe it's out of our hands. Maybe we're only affecting it like 50%, and it would cost like a huge amount economically to change it. So maybe we can't do anything. We just got to write it out. And that's a more reasonable argument. That's something we can have a discussion with. But like I've already discussed from the article we were talking about, we can have different thoughts on this. We can be optimistic. There are ways of addressing climate change if we start putting in significant action. We need somebody like Bernie Sanders who's going to invest in the Green New Deal and infrastructure. And this isn't something that hurts you as a middle-class person or a poor person. This is something that helps you because it's redistribution. You have to tax wealthier people heavily, and then you spend that money in infrastructure that goes to better paying jobs. That money pumps up the economy and everybody benefits. Even if you don't get one of those jobs, there's more money going around the economy. There's a higher velocity of income because of this money getting poured into it, and that benefits everybody. This has happened before. Part of the New Deal was giant infrastructure spending, and it was tremendous for the economy. This is something that has historically been a fairly bipartisan thing. Like that's one of the ways you juice up the economy is infrastructure spending. So the idea that addressing climate change would actually fundamentally hurt us all and be a tremendous economic cost to all of us is just wrong. It will cost billionaires, and it should, and it'll cost us somewhat, but it's also benefiting us in the long term as well as the short term economically if we do it right, like the Green New Deal does. There's other ways of addressing climate change that hurt us all and lead to an additional cost for the poor and middle class, and I think there's good reason to oppose that. But yeah, if we're just thinking about which side we should be on, and your entire side has been so wrong on something that's a scientific issue. Like this is a matter of reality. This is a matter of scientific methodology. This is like the most basic epistemological type of issue you can get. It's the clearest dividing lines between rationality and irrationality. And they've been on the wrong side all along. You should think that thinking might be affecting the rest of what you think of the rest of the thought involved in the right wing, because clearly their epistemological foundations are not valid if they're making that giant mistake on a scientific issue. And if you don't accept that, cool, we can talk more about climate change. Love to debate anybody on that. Or if you don't even want to debate, just have a discussion. Or if you want to see some facts, I have some simple arguments that demonstrate it empirically. It's not difficult. You don't have to be a scientist. We can make this very simple and incontroversial. Anyway. So that was the main takeaway I was getting from this Ben Shapiro thing was like, how can you be so dismissive of Trump without seeing that as a red flag for your whole party? But his main argument from his latest video was that, well, we don't know that there's a quid pro quo. He might have just been fighting general corruption in Ukraine. And he comes back to this point over and over again. And I'm not going to play the video. It's not worth it. It's long, and he just keeps making similar points. And he does go over some useful stuff. I'm not going to say the whole thing was garbage. He goes over some facts and timelines. But the main argument I was getting into so far was that we don't have a legal reason to think that this is all about trying to get information on Biden. It might have been part of a broader anti-corruption effort like Obama and Biden had. Like, they were talking about corruption in Ukraine, and they were putting pressure on the government of Ukraine to correct that corruption. Well, the fundamental problem with this argument is we can read the transcript. There is nothing in there about any other corruption except for the Bidens. So it's pretty clear anytime anyone in the administration is talking to Ukraine, they're talking about corruption. Ukraine knows what they're talking about because that's the only example they've given. They're not talking about, well, this oligarch you have is kind of shady and he's kind of mistreating his workers. I think he's buying off politicians, so you should investigate this guy. And this politician you have is super shady. I think people are buying him off. No, there's none of that. They're only talking about Biden and then corruption broadly. Well, what do you think they're talking about corruption broadly when they've only talked about one specific example? This is the easiest shit in the world to see through. And if you're talking about a legal argument, fine. But this is not a typical legal case. This is impeachment. This is the President of the United States. We don't need to rely purely on legal precedents and the minutia of law. We need to talk about what's actually right and what kind of actions we should be tolerating from the President of the United States. And trying to interpret all of your role as a president in light of your own narcissistic political futures, which is what this is. He's like, I'm going to hold back the aid that Congress voted on that I have no right to hold back because I want you to make sure I get reelected in 2020. He doesn't give a shit about the people of the United States. And that's perfectly clear by this and a billion other things. So that's a bad argument. And again, if somebody's making bad arguments on a regular basis and not correcting themselves when it's pointed out, like Ben Shapiro and every other right-wing pundit does, they're not credible, and maybe you should think about going to a different side if you value truth, if you value well-being, if you value these values that we started off by talking about. Maybe you're on the wrong side. And these were just some things that came up for me today. So, I mean, you can get a lot more foundational, and I would like to get into more specific policies. And if you disagree and you're on the right and you think you can make an argument for why you should be on the right, let's talk. Get in contact with me. I have my Discord link on my channel. I'll put it in comments as well. I'll put it in the description. You can jump in my Discord. You can direct message me on my Discord. Best way to get a hold of me. You can comment in the server. We can talk about stuff. And let's talk about it. Because there's obviously a lot of broad issues for right-left that I haven't even touched. And I'm not going to touch today. These are. I don't want people to think this was the entire argument for why you shouldn't be on the right. So obviously there's a lot more to it. But that's just a couple little red flags that you got to think about. You know, Trump's a really bad decision. And if you disagree with that, we can talk about it. But if you don't, if you're like Ben Shapiro, you think that he's a really crap president, then that should be a red flag for you if you agree with Ben Shapiro. And secondly, if you agree on climate change, that should be a red flag that everybody has been getting it so wildly wrong for so long on the right wing. Maybe they're not having some very clear thinking process and a very clear methodology maybe they're relying on the wrong stuff. Maybe they're relying on oligarchs and think tanks instead of scientists. So, something to think about. So, anyway, thanks so much for hanging out. And if you watch this later, I know I stream kind of late at night because I'm on the West Coast. And so if you're not on the West Coast, it's pretty late. But hey, it's what's convenient for me. I still work for a living, so it is what it is. If you're watching this later, please comment. Feel free to jump in my Discord and we can have a conversation there too. So thanks so much for coming, and have a good night. And end the stream. Where's my button at? All right. Have a good night.